Welcome to the Holistic Science of Sleep Method for Adult and Child Sleep. I am Oscategui. Before we get started, I just want to go over some technical issues. If you currently are unmuted, please mute yourself. This will allow for any white noise in the background to be eliminated so that we can hear clearly. And what I am going to do is, in the end, I will take questions and answers. So if during the presentation, I'm going to be sharing a lot of information. If during the presentation you are very moved by something that I shared or have a particular question to something that I shared, then I encourage you to down or even put it in the chat box so that you don't miss it being addressed later on, and I'm happy to then address all your questions or comments later on. Let's see if there's anything else I wanted to address. Okay, great. Looks like everybody's on mute, and we will begin. So welcome, everyone. I am thrilled and excited about sharing my Holistic Science of Sleep Method with all of you today. I love health. I've been in the health and fitness industry for more than 18 years now. I have a deep respect and honor for the human body. And when I was given the opportunity to dive more into sleep as a specialty a few years ago, I was astounded. I was blown away by how much information was out there and also how much information was lacking from an integrative approach, from a holistic approach. So today, I couldn't be more thrilled to share with all of you my findings and to share with you a new perspective and also get your thoughts from it. The first thing I wanted to do is I wanted to just take a moment in the spirit of role modeling the kind of energy and role modeling and honoring for sleep. I just want to take a moment for all of us to take what I call a daily pause. So before we begin, we're just going to take a moment to tune in, to allow ourselves to settle in and arrive to today's webinar. Allow ourselves to get really present in our body, present with our sensations. Notice your breath. As you inhale, feel your inhalation as it's coming in and moving through your body. And as you exhale, feel the exhalation as it's releasing to your body. And as the exhalation is releasing, feel yourself surrendering and opening. And what I invite you to do throughout today's call is to just set aside for a moment, just for the call today, just set aside for a moment any expectations or beliefs around sleep. Allow yourself to have an open curiosity. Feel your body fully present throughout the presentation and see where it takes you. I also encourage you to question absolutely everything that I share. One of the reasons I'm here today and why I do what I do and I share what I share is because I question everything and I research everything. So I encourage you to do the same and not to take my word for it. I also want to share that there is no one right way. We hear quite often what's right and what's wrong, what's good and what's bad. And today's webinar is not about proving what's right or standing behind any one particular approach or method. Today is really about looking at sleep as a function of the human body. We're going to look at sleep as a function of the human body and approach it from a health standpoint and understand what that means. So as I begin, I wanted to first start with the history of child sleep and child sleep training. Now, we're going to focus on adult sleep as well because it's tied in. Some of you might be on the call wanting to learn a little bit more about adult sleep and how that ties into the child sleep. And so we will get into that. But I wanted to start out a little bit about the history because it's always important to understand where we've gotten to today. And right before I share the history, I'm actually going to start out with a quote by Tracy Castle's PhD of evolutionary parenting. It's interesting, when I read this article, the last paragraph that she wrote actually stood out to me, and it's very relevant to today's webinar and to what what moved me to provide this Holistic Science of Sleep method and also my book, what led me to be inspired to write my book. She says, doctors and experts have been telling parents to leave children to cry to learn to sleep for at least a couple of generations, and yet this is what we have. And I would add to that, that it's not just, doctors and experts have been telling to leave children to cry to learn to sleep. Doctors and experts have been telling, parents to do all sorts of things. So from no cry to cry it out, all sorts of approaches. And so I would add that here for at least a couple of generations, and yet this is what we have. At the end of the day, we have to ask ourselves, if all this sleep training were really helping kids develop proper sleep habits, shouldn't we have a society of great sleepers instead of the opposite? And what's very interesting is that if you look statistically at the challenge of sleep that children and adults are having, it's actually risen, not decreased. And so one has to ask themselves, what's going on, right? And yet we've started this amazing evolution of, child sleep consulting and child sleep training, but yet there's still a rise. So that's a very, very interesting thing to understand and note. And so that then leads us to the history here. During the Industrial Revolution in the 18th century, mothers were warned not to spoil their children. So this was a perception and a belief that began. As a result, cribs were moved to another room if the home was large enough. Co-sleeping actually was a very common practice until the 19th century, even in the industrialized West. With infants sleeping alone in another room, it was easy for parents to follow the cried-out advice, even if it went against their gut instincts. There was a fear of creating demanding monsters. In the 20th century, detached methods of no breastfeeding and bottle feeding were introduced. Dr. Emmett Holt, an American pediatrician and child-rearing expert, was the first person to make the cried-out approach explicit in 1894. Most people attribute the extinction of cried-out to Weisbluth, but it actually began with Dr. Luther Emmett Holt. And then behavioral psychologist John B. Watson, around 1928, came in and he started introducing a lot of the behavioral approaches and really looking at behavior from the standpoint of, some of you who know Gina Ford, like the rigid routines and things like that. Then we had Dr. Benjamin Spock, who came out in the 40s and 50s with the Bible of not just sleep, but everything, how to care for your child and so on. We had Ferber, who came out in 1985 with controlled crying, so not extinction, but more of a, time checks and things like that. Weisbluth, we all know, with the extinction. We had Elizabeth Pantley with no cry. We have Kim West with the gentle sleep. And then we've got, I could have many, many slides here to introduce the various approaches, but we have many approaches from cried out to no cry, everything in between, tons of integration all over the place. And so then there's me and my institute, and what I decided to do is take a different approach and really look at sleep from a whole different perspective that was not just about sleep alone, but really looking at how sleep is affected by many other factors in our health and how health affects sleep. I'm just going to mute a few people here 1 second. I want to make sure we don't get any background noise. And then there's common beliefs surrounding infant sleep. And so this is also important to just take a step back and to understand what are these beliefs that we've been told and that we also abide by when we are facing or working with a child sleep situation. Well, sometimes we believe babies manipulate, and that word I hear actually quite often, and I also see quite often amongst discussions. Babies must sleep in the exact hours according to the sleep chart, right? And then you have all these different kinds of formulas and wake and sleep windows and people being exact and using those kinds of things. Babies are creating sleep associations and bad habits when rocking, co-sleeping, breastfeeding. Co-sleeping with my baby is dangerous. Babies need to be taught to sleep. Babies can sleep through the night. My baby needs to adapt to my schedule. I need to adapt to my baby's schedule. Crying is good or crying is bad. My baby is good or my baby's bad. Sleep is so important that we must make our children sleep to get the recommended amount of sleep at the recommended times. And sleep training is the only alternative in our society when parents are sleep deprived and still need to work. So all of these are common average beliefs that are swimming around that people quite often are discussing and throwing out there. And so part of what allowed me to get to where I am today is, again, I questioned all of this. I'm like, wait a minute, what's behind these beliefs? Are these true? Let me start investigating and finding things out more. And I have had my own experience. I can easily share my experience with my clients, with my own children. But for the sake of the entire industry and for the sake of understanding, I had to actually go beyond that and extend myself to researching other consultants' experiences, other parents' experiences, and so on. And then we have the role of the media and books and authority on infant sleep in our Western culture. In our Western culture, media, books, and authorities have mostly shaped and influenced our beliefs about sleep. Parents assume the information being shared by media, books, and authorities on infant sleep is the only solution. However, when you begin to dig deeper, you find that the information being shared is based on partial findings that does not include the whole picture. If there's a huge takeaway from this, you forget anything else, this is what I really want people to understand. No matter if you're behind whatever approach is out there, so again, I'm not siding with any one thing. Most of what's out there is partial. They don't give you the entire picture behind what's going on. And for me, that's missing a big mark on how we address or how we approach adult and child sleep. We have to, even in adult sleep, I just gave an adult sleep course this past semester, and we reviewed so many case studies and how often the mark was missed on these cases because they were just stuck to a narrow window of understanding what was going on and so on. So really a huge takeaway from today's webinar is to understand that there's a lot of partial information out there, and it's our responsibility, if you're a professional and even a parent, to really dig a bit deeper and find out, well, what's the whole picture here? What's really going on? You have co-sleeping death articles that come out quite often, and again, they give you partial information. So you'll quite often hear how co-sleeping is dangerous, but number one, the term co-sleeping is never really truly defined. Close sleeping can mean sleeping in close proximity with your child, which means that their bed can be by your bed, hence a co-sleeper, for example. That doesn't mean you're sharing a bed. But in the bed sharing instances, there are actually guidelines for safe bed sharing in the same way there are guidelines for, safe crib sleeping. And so quite often when these articles come out, you're not taught about, or you're not given the information that these people are not following or did not follow the bed sharing guidelines. In most cases, they were under the influence of alcohol or a drug and so on, and they didn't follow the guidelines. Doctors give a lot of advice about sleep, but how many people or how many of you were aware that the average amount of education that doctors get in medical school on sleep is about 4 to 6 hours in total? That's it. So it's very interesting there that we rely on their advice about sleep when sleep is not a really big topic that's talked about. And then there's misusing terms like I've mentioned, co-sleeping, I gave you one, and sleep training. Sleep training can mean a number of things to a number of people. For some people, sleep training means the extinction cried out. For other people, sleep training means any form of sleep training, whether it's the Sleep Lady Shuffle or the Shush Pat, right? So how we use the word is really, really important in how we define it and clarifying how we're defining it. All right, and then sleep requirements, which I'll get into in a second. So I'm setting up the stage to introduce my holistic science of sleep method because I want to first start with the understanding of how misguided we all are or how we are given partial information. With sleep requirements, Dr. Gwendouar has a great website called ParentingScience.com. And she wrote this article about sleep requirements and how they're estimated. And I think this is really important to be aware of. She says that everybody knows that babies need more sleep than older children do, but how much? When she began researching baby sleep requirements, she assumed that those authoritative charts we see published everywhere, the ones telling us the average newborn needs 16 hours of sleep, for example, were based on scientifically established biological needs. She figured that somebody must have identified a link, say, between a certain number of hours of sleep and optimal rates of childhood growth, or between sleep hours and rates of infection, but she was wrong. It turns out that scientists know relatively little about baby sleep requirements. The sleep charts you see in parenting books and websites are based on how much time parents, typically Western parents, say their babies spend sleeping. For instance, studies of Australian babies reveal that the average newborn gets about 16 to 17 hours of sleep over a 24-hour period. Babies age 4 to 6 months an average of 14 hours. And the National Sleep Foundation last year, about a year ago, came out with the sleep chart, the new sleep requirements, and they narrowed their window a bit because for newborns, I think it was something like 12 to 18 hours of sleep that was estimated as the average sleep requirements. That was a pretty big window, right? And now they've actually narrowed it down 14 to 18 hours. And so what the proper requirements are for a child's sleep depends so much on so many factors. I see so many parents struggling, and even consultants or coaches, sleep coaches, struggling with giving the child the right formula, the right estimate of hours, and that ranges from child to child depending on a number of factors that we have to take into consideration. So relieving ourselves of the expectation of being right or wrong by the exact number of sleep is really important. Now, what I want to bring out about sleep training, again, because I just shared how misguided we often are, because the term means so much for so many different people, and it's usually a controversial term. It brings up a lot for so many people. Is that most sleep training is based on behavior. The behavior is the foundation of which most sleep training is being utilized. It's based on conditioning the child in some fashion or form. But what's very interesting is that when I looked into behavior, because when you're looking at sleep is addressed scientifically. If you look in Wise Booth books or Ferber, there's a lot of science behind and reasoning behind what they offer in terms of their approaches. And so there's a lot of science behind what they do and state. But then there's a heavy, along with that, there's a heavy behavioral context put to it. And so when I started researching behavior, it was very interesting. I started out with just looking at the definition of behavior. Behavior is a range of actions and mannerisms made by individuals, organisms, systems, or artificial entities in conjunction with themselves or their environment, which includes the other systems or organs around, as well as the inanimate physical environment. Behavior is the response, so this is what's so important. Behavior is the response of the system or organism to various, and I want to just highlight that word, various stimuli or inputs, whether internal or external, conscious or subconscious, overt or covert, involuntary or involuntary. Behavior is a response. And so when we are looking at our children, our babies or children, and their behavior, it is important to understand that behavior is a response of their system and organism to a variety of things, to various stimuli, that's internal and external. And so to get to the root of that, to say, okay, what does that respond to? Is their behavior a response to a security issue? Is their behavior a response to a physical need? Is their behavior a response to an emotional need? That then will set the stage to how we can approach the child's behavior in the best way, right? In the most appropriate way for that particular child. So that is key. And what I have experienced is a lot of the behavioral approaches that are out there don't take into consideration what's underneath the behavior. If the baby or child acts a certain way, here, try this approach, try this system, try this, try this way, versus if my child behaves this way, step one, why are they behaving that way? What's underneath that behavior? And where is it coming from? And then most sleep approaches ignore the child's emotion and focus more on the physical needs, sleep, nutrition, associations, and so on. This is what I talked about. I gave examples of Wise, Booth, and Ferber, and there's others, of course. But, there's a heavy focus on, the science behind it, the behavior, and then we look at the emotional piece. And then what I will add to that is that there's also a separation of my child's sleep and my sleep. And in a moment, as I introduce the holistic science of sleep, especially family sleep, it's a social, we are all living under one roof together, whether you're in separate rooms or the same room, in separate beds or the same beds. The fact of the matter is that we are in a social context. We are sharing a social environment. And so it's not my child's sleep. It's, yes, my child's sleep in relationship to my sleep, because one person's challenge affects everyone, right? Everyone is affecting everybody and influencing everyone. So you will not find that most child sleep books address child sleep from a family point of view, from a team point of view, from a social context. They address it more from a solitary context. McKenna says parents with less rigid ideas about how and where their babies should sleep are generally much happier and far less likely to be disappointed when their children cannot perform the way they're supposed to. For example, sleeping through the night. And there's been a few articles out over the last recent years, not only on the rise of sleep issues and sleep challenges, but also, interestingly enough, talking about how and questioning how our obsession with sleep and our struggle with sleep may be based upon the fact that we're stressing out about it so much. And so that's, very interesting to understand. So I went over the root of the behavior, but I also put it on a separate slide here, if you wanted to just go back and look at that. Okay, so what's all the fuss about the cry it out and the no cry and the role of crying? So when I went into this and in coming up with my holistic science of sleep method, and studying all of the different approaches and people's reasonings and research behind the cry it out and no cry and everything in between, it became very clear to me that we were allowing ourselves to get stuck in positions behind these approaches that, again, were blocking us or limiting us from understanding the role of crying. Most often, we don't even approach crying from understanding, well, what's the role of crying? Crying is a human function. It's an expression. It's a way for the body to release a variety of things. People cry not only when they're frustrated or upset, there's happy cry, right? So crying is an expression. And so there's what I call a dance or a balance to it all. If we suppress the crying and we, are afraid to allow our child to cry and we see crying as a negative thing, we're actually suppressing the child's ability to release a very important function of their body, a very important expression of their body. If there's endless crying to the opposite extreme, and we don't understand what that crying is related to, and we just ignore the crying altogether, then that's also the opposite extreme. Basically, both extremes end up doing the same thing. They both end up resulting in a situation where there's an imbalance. So what my perception and of understanding of the role of crying is that it's not about allowing a child to cry it out and learning for them to, deal with that or preventing a child from crying. It's more about understanding and accepting that crying is normal. Crying is a human expression. It serves a function. It's a way of communicating. And so approaching crying from the standpoint of what's the crying communicating? What's beneath this crying? What is the communication here? That then allows for an opening to connect with your child and even yourself to another level, a deeper level that then can allow us to approach the situation from a place that's appropriate for ourselves and our children. One of the I think challenges and limitations of how we're approaching adult and child sleep is our Western culture lifestyle. In a family situation, usually you'll have two parents or a single parent. It's rare to have extended family these days. And in the situations where I've worked with extended families, there's some turmoil there because there's differences in approaching sleep. But there's usually little support or no support. And so that is definitely a limitation. Prenatal is more emphasized than postnatal. We have so much on preparing for childbirth. And after the baby comes, there's very little support for the postpartum period. And in sleep, and this is why I was so moved to start sleep education during pregnancy, because child sleep consulting, you're going to have, there are approaches out there that say children can sleep 12 hours and sleep train them at, early infancy. But most child sleep experts agree that sleep training in any shape or form with any approach begins on average at 6 months. Some before, but 6 months is usually the average. So 4 to 6 months right, in that window of time, but 6 months is usually the average. So between birth and 6 months or birth and 4 months, no support, right? And what do we do then? How do we handle all the changes and things happening, and what do we do then? So this then drove me to go, wait a minute, what's going on here, right? First, I'm learning all these misguided information and partial truths and all these things going on, and then I'm realizing, wow, we're addressing sleep 4, 5, 6 months. Pregnancy is such a crucial time to address sleep for many reasons. Number one, there is research showing a lot of biological understanding and correlation between how the mother sleeps and her health and the baby's sleep and how that's affected. And I have resources for all of this. And on top of that, there's also correlation between how, and again, sleep is tied into health, how the mother is sleeping in her health and how that's related to the laboring process, right, her whole experience there. And so, and then we have a whole window of education, because if we start speaking with families and informing them about child sleep and their own sleep prior to the birth of a child, you can only imagine how much preventative measures that would take. Now, we're not going to avoid, as a result, challenges coming our way. Challenges will come our way. But having the information prior and having the ability to make lifestyle changes prior sets us up for a much, much stronger advantage for ourselves and our babies. Overstimulation, our Western cultural lifestyle is very overstimulated. We have information overload, reaping, coming at all seams. We go from activity to activity to activity. I'm going to talk about why daily pauses are important. Prescription meds are on the rise. Obesity is on the rise. And, as a result, there's no transition from day to night. As we go all day, and then even after the sun sets, we're still blasting lights. And the transition from night basically doesn't, from day to night doesn't exist. It's like, okay, I'm going from bright lights, and then I go to sleep. And there's no window and opportunity to transition. Child sleep, as I said earlier, is a family sleep issue. Oftentimes, parents do not associate the fact that poor sleep habits developed prior to their baby's arrival could be contributing to their child's sleep challenges after birth. When a child is experiencing sleep challenges, the whole family is affected. This is why it is critical to address both child and adult sleep, and when possible, begin supporting healthy sleep habits during pregnancy. Parents' relationship to their own sleep may affect their child's sleep. So this is also key. You're not going to find this everywhere. A parent's history with sleep, a parent's old beliefs around sleep for themselves, a parent's role modeling of sleep. This is so key. Children, we teach so much to children by what we say, right? But the real teaching happens by what we are role modeling. And this is so key, how we're role modeling sleep for ourselves and for our children. So I'm going to be introducing a holistic way of approaching sleep that addresses the root. And this is not based on any sleep training, but based on health, connection with nature and our environment, social and lifestyle influences and development, balance and integration. Balance and integration are very key. So I want to start out with the Wheel of Health. As I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, health and fitness has been my world and my passion for over 18 years. For those of you that don't know, I have studied several modalities. I trained in yoga therapy. I've had tons and tons of education and training in yoga and pre and postnatal yoga as well. I have I've trained in beliefs, I've trained in nutrition, I've trained in exercise, I've trained in stress management, sleep, I've trained in everything you're seeing here. And I'm a learning junkie. I love learning. I can't get enough. I do have to take a step back sometimes and put myself in check as a result and take my daily pauses and my breaks. But I have such a passion for health and such a trust for health that I understand that when the body is in balance, and when I talk about balance, I don't mean an idea of perfection, because I think perfection also limits us, this sense of having a perfect life and things perfect. For me, balance means adaptability and easing into adaptability. There's a quote that I remind myself a lot of times, and I enjoy sharing with others at times when it's appropriate, which says, "It's not the intelligent and it's not the strongest that survive. It's the most adaptable." And a lot of times our limitations and our struggles come from having the ability to easily adapt to changes. And so our children are going through from birth, right, until forever, even us. We all go, even through into adulthood, we go through various changes physiologically, emotionally. And learning how to adapt and gaining a resilience to adapt and learning to dance with adapting is extremely important. So when I see balance and when I understand balance, balance for me means allowing an integration and a sense of homeostasis where you have the ability to integrate and ease into adapting to your situation and to your environment and social. I'll get into that. So what we're approaching in the Holistic Science of Sleep method looks at the Wheel of Health as key. This is the foundation. This is what the method is based on. It's based on understanding that all of these, sleep is affected by all of these, by communication, stress, thoughts, breath, hydration, nutrition, movement. And all of these things are affected by sleep. So if sleep is out of balance, all these things will be affected as well. And then I want to take it a step back. I'm looking at the Wheel of Health from the Duke Integrative Medicine. And I love, love, love this because I've broken my method down to a combination of the Wheel of Health from the Duke Integrative of Medicine as well as the Wheel of Health you just saw. If you look at the Duke Integrative Medicine Wheel of Health, you'll see that in the very middle, the core center is you. It's the mindful awareness. When your child is having a sleep issue, it's important that we center ourselves and get into the core of awareness, of mindfulness. Take a step back, take a pause, connect with ourselves and then the situation. Because when we're centered and grounded, the ability to work with the external factors is extremely important. Part of what's happening is that families, parents, caregivers are so sleep deprived themselves or so stressed out themselves, and we expect them in this state to have the ability then to give their child, a restful, calming, sleeping environment, restful, calm sleep. We expect our children to sleep well if we're not sleeping well and if we're stressed out. So the priority or the totem pole begins with ourselves. When you think of navigating a ship, if the person navigating the ship is not feeling well, is off-centered, is weak, can't hardly see, you can imagine that that ship is going to suffer, right? Them navigating that ship. Once the ship is navigated by someone that's, on their best, they're alert, they're awake, they're present, they're healthy, then the ability to navigate that ship becomes much more easeful, right? So I love how this Wheel of Health begins with that. And then as we move out, we see that we have mind and body connection, movement, exercise, and rest, nutrition, personal and professional development, physical environment, relationships and communication, and spirituality. And when I say spirituality, this can mean a lot of things as well. I know sometimes we get caught up in what that means. It's not just religion. Spirituality is just a deeper sense of how one is connecting to a more expansive space. So we have ourselves and our bodies and our connection with ourselves. And then there is a deeper connection with a more expansive energy, a more expansive aspect. And so this is what and everybody relates to that expansion. Some people relate to it as God, and some relate to it as Allah, and some relate to it as nature and energy and all sorts of things. And so that's what I mean by that. And so the Wheel of Health, the Holistic Science of Sleep method is a combination of this Wheel of Health, a traditional Wheel of Health, and then an integrative Wheel of Health that's taking all of this into consideration when we're looking at adult and child sleep. And the last thing I'm going to say before I go right into the methodology is that quite often many parents seek the support of in-person and online forums and groups. You might see this. You might, be on some online forum. You might attend some in-person group. And people are asking, oh, my 7.5-month-old can't sleep. Just 3 days ago, he was sleeping fine and all of a sudden started waking up at night. What do I do? What's wrong, right? So that's what they ask. And then most times, you're going to have people respond very generally. Oh, my child did the same, and here's what I did. Or, oh, this book says that. And instead of asking direct questions to that person's direct experience and to what's happening in their experience, in their situation, we're addressing each other from generalities. My 7.5-month-old, just 3 days ago is not sleeping well. And then, I went through that experience and here's what I found, and here are these books and here are these articles, versus going, tell me more about your situation. I want to hear more about the 7.5-month-old, your child, and I want to hear more about, the exact what's happening, right? Like everything, like how are they, maybe they ate something, or did they have a recent vaccination, or are they learning to sit up and crawl? And there's so many questions to ask to get very specific about what is going on, to then understand what might be the cause of that 7.5-month-old all of a sudden having sleep issues, right? Sleep challenges, versus just throwing out generalities of what we've read or what we've experienced. And so turning that around is really important. So the Holistic Science of Sleep method provides the framework and understanding that supports parent and professionals to address the root of a sleep challenge and not work from a place of, oh, you're experiencing that? Well, this book says this, or I learned that, or this. We want to dive in. We want to dive into that situation. And then, yes, if it's suitable, we can apply certain things that we've learned from a book or from our own education and so on, once we learn more about that case. All right, so I know you've all been waiting for this because I've been setting up the stage. What is the Holistic Science of Sleep method? I took the word holistic and science together because really I felt that these two, this is what's happening. We rely so much on science, that then we eliminate, or we unintentionally a lot of times block out the holistic aspect of things, or we can be so, sometimes we get so expansive and so integrated that we don't always take into consideration the science. So bringing these two together was very, very important. The Holistic Science of Sleep method is an adult and child sleep system that combines holistic thinking and application with a scientific method to provide long-term and balanced solutions to adult and child sleep challenges. It investigates and addresses imbalances in optimal human function and external forces that inhibit sleep and may lead to adult and child sleep challenges. So in optimal human function, we're looking at the physical, mental, and emotional states, and external forces, we're looking at social, cultural, and environmental components. So I'm going to be introducing foundations, I'm going to be introducing solutions, and I'm going to be introducing keys, and then I'm going to take Q&A. Number one, our attitude towards sleep. How do we feel about sleep? When I work with families, one of my questions is, what is your relationship to sleep and what do you feel about sleep? Our culture has built such a negative understanding of sleep, a relationship with sleep. Some of you may have heard, the term like, oh, sleep is even seen like, oh, yeah, sleep is for the birds, the more you can go out and put out and stay up, the stronger you are kind of thing. And there's that mentality out there too. And there's also this challenge and frustration with sleep. So what is your relationship to sleep? How do you feel about sleep? Allowing ourselves to invite a falling in love with sleep, to really see sleep as our friend, our companion, and not as a struggle, and to understand that our bodies want to sleep. See, one of the biggest things that I've learned, and there's a balance to this, there's many things from the time we're born until we die that we're all learning. So you can look at it in the context of, do you need to be taught? So do children need to be taught to sleep? Do I need to be taught to sleep? Versus, you know, we're always learning. Part of our human evolvement or development is always learning, right? That's part of who we are and what we are and what makes us who we are and what we are and how we function with one another. So when I started understanding, it's not so much that children need to be taught to sleep. The body's already designed to sleep. That's true. It's already designed to sleep. It needs rest in order to stay alive, right? People usually name 3 things, but I name 4, right? What are the 4 things you can live the least amount of time with? I say breath, right? Air, water, these are all in order, food, nutrition, and sleep. Because if you go without any one of those, right, the body will stop functioning. You won't be living anymore. So sleep is our companion. Sleep is a function that it is there. It knows what to do. However, what we're learning is how to adapt to sleep in a way that works for ourselves and works for our family. So that is key. So falling in love with sleep, and then really evaluating and assessing our expectations, attitudes, beliefs, and commitment towards sleep. Do we treat sleep like it's for the birds and like, no, you know, we don't need it and we're more resilient when we don't sleep and, you know, I have to work and go and that makes me strong and that's what I'm modeling for my children? Do I approach sleep of, you know, like I'm going to the point of exhaustion and I'll avoid it as much as possible? Do I hate sleep? Do I find sleep, you know, annoying? Does it bother me? So, you know, and what other beliefs do I have around it? How did my parents sleep? You know, one interesting exercise is to learn the history of not only our sleep and how we've come into healthy sleep habits ourselves, but then how our parents slept and what that modeled to us and so on. And then considering the notion of shared or social sleep. So this is something I learned from Dr. Ruben Nyman, who has a book called The Yoga of Sleep. He does a lot of mostly work on adult sleep, but he did a really great webinar for the International Maternity and Parenting Institute that was just extremely fabulous. And I love the way in the context that he put into considering the notion of shared and social sleep. Because the reality is, sleep is, even if you are alone in your bed, sleep is still very social and very shared in the sense that you're sharing your sleep with a bed. You're sharing your sleep with your environment. And you're sharing your sleep on a more expansive level with a lot of people. I think that he quoted something like, he said something like, right now, 2 million people are sleeping, something like that. So like while we're awake, there's a whole slew of people sleeping right now. And so if we look at it from a much more expansive context, it's shared. It's not, you know, when we narrow down sleep, we isolate it and we consider it solitary, but the fact of the matter is it's actually very shared. It's very social. And what's so interesting, too, is even if your child is in their own room or in the same room, in their own bed, let's say, it's still very shared and social because you're under one roof as a family. So understanding it from that point also allows us to open up to other possibilities. Committing and making sleep a priority for yourself and your family is key because, again, are we ourselves, what are we role modeling for ourselves as parents or caregivers with sleep? And then if we have a poor relationship with sleep ourselves, if we don't like it, if we have this attitude of like, you know, we don't need it, then how do we expect our children to do the same? Stress management is also key, and inviting relaxation is key because, see, what most people feel or don't consider is that when you have a lifestyle where you're going, activity after activity after activity, you're taking absolutely no time throughout the day to unwind. Imagine like a rubber band, okay? You're stretching that rubber band, stretching that rubber band, stretching that rubber band, stretching that rubber band. Here comes the nighttime. What happens when you release that rubber band? It's going to snap back pretty hard, right? Now, imagine you take that same rubber band. You're pulling it a little and you're letting go. You're pulling it a little and letting go. You're pulling it a little and letting go. Here comes the nighttime. You're about to sleep. Is there going to be any huge snapping back of the rubber band? Absolutely not. This is how I view stress management and relaxation, and why I invite this as a key lifestyle, key way of living, because when we're giving ourselves and our children the capacity and ability to release, to take pauses, those pauses might mean that your child will cry in the daytime because they're frustrated or they're going through a change or something's happening. And the sense of release that they're being given in the day will then allow them to, like that rubber band, release and then go back. And by the time nighttime comes, the nighttime doesn't become the only resource to allow for their full expression or, frustration. And also that pausing could mean, for us adults especially too, emotions might come up or you might get insights. You're allowing from a physiological standpoint as well to let your breath come into more of a homeostasis, because if you're going, your breath sometimes doesn't have the capacity to settle. Your body doesn't have the capacity to settle. So bringing ourselves to more of a balance, more of an integration of the adapting to the stimulation and no stimulation, and going back and forth between the two throughout the day sets up the stage for a much easier transition to the nighttime. So this requires us to understand, well, what is our energetic tempo? Do we have a go, 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 go energy? Can we take a little step back? Can we, there's really a lot of great resources. Like we have apps now on your smartphones. You don't even need to use Wi-Fi. Once you download them on your Wi-Fi, you can turn off your Wi-Fi and have it on airplane mode. There's like the Calm app, for example, and there's others that you can time it for 5 minutes and just take a pause, do a little breathing exercise or a little guided meditation, and there you go. So, these are small little things that you can put throughout the day that are extremely helpful and also model for your children. Learning your child's sleepy cues, learning their style of showing how they relax, how they come in and out of relaxed states, and when they're moving into a state of sleepiness is so key. And so that requires us to allow our child to teach us, learn from our children. Because yes, there are sleep-wake windows, and yes, there are formulas, and yes, there's times, there's more optimal times in the day to sleep and nap and all these kinds of things. But they are also in relationship to our lifestyle, to our environment, to the child's, development of their biological rhythms and circadian rhythms, and, also what they're eating. And there's so much that comes into play with that. So adjusting, co-regulating, and adjusting to those rhythms and those tempos on all those levels are key. Relationship to self. So again, from that integrative medicine wheel of health from Duke, assessing our overall well-being. A lot of times when our child is reflecting to us an issue, we go directly to it being the child issue. But if we take a step back and go, okay, how is this affecting me? But more importantly, where am I at? Where am I at here? Assessing our overall well-being, our sleep history, our confidence. If we're anxious and stressful, if we're undergoing, emotionally some tough things, even beyond, like let's say you're going into PTSD, or you're going into anxiety or postpartum depression, or, it's important to recognize what we're going through and then give ourselves the support we need. Because again, I'll give you the analogy of the ship and navigating the ship. We can't expect ourselves to navigate the ship if we are not in the condition to navigate that ship. So we must put ourselves as a priority. We must really assess our well-being and then get the support that we need in order to support us through that. And there's lots of ways. There's not just one way. I know you might be thinking, well, I can't afford support, or I don't know if I have support, or there's so many outlets out there, especially now with the way we can connect socially and online. My goodness, there's so many ways that we can connect. And then once we come out of our relationship to self, we begin to look at our relationship to our partner, our child, our entire household. What is the quality of my relationship to my partner? And it's interesting because a lot of times issues that go on between couples stem from, first, the self. When we address the issues with ourselves, then we're able to address the issues we have with our partner on another level. So assess that quality, our alignments, our connection, our support system. Understanding, and this I have read a few about, and I like the context recently. Through Rebecca Thompson-Hitt, who is a founder of Consciously Parenting, and I'm going to be sharing and promoting a fabulous sleep series that she did with Ray Castellino and Mary Jackson that I recently heard, and I was so moved because all the information and everything that I've been discovering, it felt like, oh my goodness, we're in so much alignment. You know, they're speaking my language. And one of the things that Ray speaks about is the family nervous system, that, you know, we have our own personal nervous system, but then we also have a family nervous system that is always adapting and co-regulating to one another. And so understanding that, and he gave the example of being with a group of moms and their babies, and how they took, you know, the energetic tempo and how it was in a certain way, like the babies were crying, things were busy, the room had a certain quality of this energy, more toward like a almost stimulating side. And when the mothers began to work with the energetic tempo and then pause for a moment, connect eye to eye, all of a sudden, the energetic tempo of the room, the relationship the moms had with themselves, each other, and the children started to shift. And so that all relates to, again, this understanding of the fact that we each have our own nervous system that is adapting and co-regulating to internally, externally, but then that is also affecting each other. And that is key. So then we go into, and then you'll see at the very top here, for all of these that I introduced, you can see how these tie into the Wheel of Health. This section is on thoughts and beliefs. This section is on stress management, relationships, and communication. This section is on breath, hydration, nutrition, and movement, more of like the fitness part of it. You know, breath is a really great way to indicate and to indicate to us, you know, where we're at. Are we holding our breath? Is our breath fast? Is our breath slow? Is our breath, you know, interrupted and not in a flow? So assessing our breath quality and our child's breath quality is key. One of the things that I've introduced, and I've also supported a lot of professionals I work with, I've worked with my clients and other professionals with this, is co-regulating or synchronizing breath. So when you're feeling a challenge coming on with your child sleeping, one thing to do is to tune into our breath. Notice our breath like we did in the beginning today. Notice the inhalation, the exhalation. Allow ourselves to be in close proximity of our child where we're either holding them or laying down next to them. And then breathe. Breathe with our children, slowing down our breath. Now, obviously, if there's, you know, like if there's a food intolerance going on, if there's a diaper change, if there's other things, that might not always work, right? We have to attend to those things. But when all the needs are met and it's a sense of an energetic shift that needs to happen, the beauty and the power of breath is phenomenal. Nutrition. So this morning I actually was talking to a new student of our course, of our maternity and child sleep course, and she was sharing with me that, you know, her son had gone through this bouts and bouts and bouts of, you know, arching the back. She thought it was reflux and all these things. There was many tests. The doctors told her it was reflux. But her intuition told her something else was going on. So she investigated a bit further. And as it turns out, she found out that her child has a food intolerance to milk. And so that shifted things for her. In most child sleep books, you will not find, other than talking about, you know, breastfeeding and its relationship to that, or the amount of feeding and or weaning and things like that, you're not really going to find a whole lot about pro and anti-sleep foods, and you're not really going to find a lot about the relationship of nutritional deficiencies, food sensitivities, and intolerances, and how those relate to sleep. Now, more and more people are coming out with this information, which is great. But I'm talking about the old school books that are out there that most people are still referring to as the Bibles or as the go-tos for child sleep. And even with adult sleep, it's the same thing. You know, a lot of times, rather than addressing the root, people are being given medicines and different things without first understanding, wait a minute, is there a food insensitivity or intolerance? And so assessing food and drink intake, and I do recommend, if there's obviously if this is suspected, you know, if there's something that leads you to believe this, having a blood panel done to assess potential deficiencies, imbalances, food sensitivities, and tolerance is huge. because iron affects sleep. DHA affects sleep. There's so much that affects sleep. Even yesterday I posted, a lot of times we refer to melatonin and melatonin's relationship to sleep. And so you have melatonin pills and supplements and all of that out there. However, serotonin is just as important and plays such an integral role in sleep. And so, again, really understanding how the relationships of all of the our entire system and how it works, and what deficiencies or imbalances or sensitivities, allergies, intolerances, all of that can create and can inhibit sleep is important to know. And then there's movement. Movement is key. On a general level, when we're very sedentary, being sedentary slows things down. It blocks our system from flowing and can create all sorts of problems. On the level of sleep, you can see here, I wrote, according to the National Sleep Foundation, people sleep significantly better and feel more alert during the day if they get at least 150 minutes of exercise a week, a new study concludes. And they say increasingly the scientific evidence is encouraging as regular physical activity may serve as a non-pharmaceutical alternative to improve sleep. In movement, there's so much that happens. It's a flow. It's an opening. And when our children are also they're going through these developmental growths, giving them the opportunity to, release and move and explore is extremely important. And so that is key here as well. And so we want to look at our relationship to movement in our child. Okay, then we go into the emotional well-being, which ties into behavior and ties into things like understanding crying and so on. Making sure that all the child's needs are met, medical conditions ruled out, and then assessing the physical, mental, and emotional well-being, the nervous system, and individual, social, birth history, health history, is key. And again, this is a part that you won't find in most, go-to sleep books. Now we have fabulous organizations like Hand in Hand Parenting. We have Consciously Parenting. We have Ray and Mary doing their work with the Custody training. We've got just Aware Parenting. We've got conscious parenting. There's so much that's coming out that's tying in the emotional piece. Ann Caird, who is a graduate of ours, who's also been in the sleep field for 30 years, when she came on board as a participant of our course, and we aligned so quickly because of how she's tying in emotional well-being as a key factor into her work. And I also want to give her credit for the work that she's doing with emotional well-being, because she's fabulous, and she's done so much to pioneer in this field. And so when we understand that, a child on a different level than us is very conscious of what's happening. They're from the time they're in the womb. There's a movie called In Utero at the Birth Psychology Conference that I recently saw that was very, very powerful, indicating and understanding how much children know and are really conscious, actually, and how they're taking in during the womb and that environment and afterwards. And so, for example, if a child has gone through a birth trauma, and even an adult as well, for that to be addressed and for that to be processed is extremely important. There's a book that's called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. It's a book that I refer to. It's looking at the forms of how we deal stress physiologically, and give the example of how the zebras, for example, shake out their stress in their body and actually process the stress and then release the stress. And so when one goes through a trauma, in the case, let's say, of a birth trauma, there's many kinds of trauma, right? Sexual abuse and all different kinds of things, domestic violence. But in the case, let's say, of a birth trauma, the ability for that child to process that trauma, to move through that trauma, to allow physiologically their body to release that is key. And so if we're not aware of how that trauma correlates to, their needing to cry and needing to process and needing to, that security and emotional well-being, you can imagine that how many people are using extinction methods or controlled crying and other many different forms of that sort that are not serving that child appropriately, because the way that they need to be addressed is very, very differently as a result. So That's one example. I'm not going to get too much into it, but just opening the window of understanding that. And then also, you know, the nervous system, again, because from an emotional standpoint, we've got that emotional regulation happening and processing happening. But then we've got, you know, the nervous system itself that is developing. And when the nervous system is not developing in a way that is on target or balanced, what ends up happening is that the body does not have the ability to rest. The body will, to some extent, be in light sleep mode or be in a form of not full deep rest and will always be alert. So understanding how physiologically security plays a role, as well as emotionally, mentally it plays a role, is key. And then behavior, assessing what is causing the child's or adult's behavior, assessing what is causing the child's crying, again, that is key. And I have a quote here that says, meeting a child at their point of need, that need is expressed through meltdown, yelling, disrespect, or defiance, takes patience, self-control, and empathy on the part of the parent, which can be a huge growth experience for the parent if they themselves who were not parented that way. But the impact of living those positive life skills in front of our children is immeasurable. And so what that means is that, no, this is not about having guilt or shame on ourselves. We're human. It's not about living a perfect life and being the perfect parent. We're going to have our struggles, right? I share with people, I have my parenting struggles. Parenting for me, out of everything I've done in my entire life, I'm always the first to admit, that is the most challenging. I can handle 3 or 4 businesses at a time and business challenges and others, but boy, parenting, wow, that is a challenge because it brings up my stuff. And guess what? I'm not meant to be perfect. I'm not meant to be, you know, perfect with my children. They're going to see sides of me sometimes that I still need to work through. But having compassion and empathy, not just for my children, but more importantly for myself, when my children see that although I am not always my best and my most perfect, when they see that I'm able to accept that and process that and embrace that, that then role models for them a sense of acceptance and self-esteem that also sets the way. So I wanted to mention that because it's important that we understand our influence, but also understand the need for our own support and the need for ourselves of acceptance and empathy for ourselves, which is very important. And then we have, and this is the last slide for the foundations, and we'll be wrapping up in just a few minutes. Then we have here how our environment and how our nature's, the correlation with nature, our physiological connections with light and dark cycles. You know, and depending on where you live, because some of you might live in a location where the sun is rising and sun setting more consistently, like if you're closer to the equator. Some of you who live more north or more, you know, south are going to have longer periods, especially in winter and summer times, of more sunlight and less sunlight and more dark. And so adapting and honoring these transitions, sunrise and sunset, allowing ourselves to be in sync with these cycles and giving our children the opportunity to be in sync with these cycles so that our bodies can enter into the sync of these cycles is important. And that also means being very aware of our exposure to artificial lights and how that's playing a role as well. So, you know, the blue lights and the screens and the electronics and all those kinds of things. And then there's our sleep environment. And I put this picture here, so you know, I wanted to just give an example of a way that, you know, obviously I'm not suggesting we all, that realistically and practically this is not feasible for all of us, right? But I put this picture to connect and correlate nature and the bedroom because they go hand in hand. The more connected and in sync we are with the rhythms of nature, the more connected and in sync we are with the rhythms of wake to sleep. Because waking and sleeping go hand in hand, so we're emphasizing sleep here, but the cycles and the dance that happens is in that rhythm and that integration and balance between nature and our environment. So we want to really look at, you know, how many electronics are plugged into our room. Is our room stuffy? What's the air quality like? Is our mattress one that, you know, and I'm talking about children as well, one that supports our posture and sleep, the smell in the room, you know, are there any fragrances or things that might be overly, you know, limiting and so on. We want to really assess and understand that the sleep environment is like a sanctuary. It's an environment where we can allow, when you walk in, here's a test. When you walk in, you almost feel like walking into that room calms you down. It's funny because I've created my sanctuary. I have what I call the business sanctuary, my place of work, and where I invite others to come and work. And I created a sanctuary here because, you know, business, there's the busy, and business is usually busy, right? A lot going on in business. And offsetting that busyness with a very calming environment, wow, what that did for me. And so when I walk into my sanctuary, I walk in and immediately I feel like I'm being covered with a blanket of relaxation. And so the bedroom is no different. When you walk in, do you feel a sense of calmness, relaxation? And if not, what can you do to do that? It might mean changing the bedroom color. It might mean, you know, allowing for more airflow. It might mean for, you know, changing and shifting some things more in a feng shui way. There's many ways to make that sanctuary. And then understanding too, like chemicals and toxins and things that can be inhibiting sleep. Schedule, you know, scheduling is important because the body's designed to be on a schedule, like the same way that nature's on a schedule. And again, this doesn't have to be exactly the same for every single person. Like I said, we all live in different locations and different climates and have different lifestyles and rhythms and tempos and all different things going on. But having a schedule that is suitable works really well. And co-regulating with that and flowing with that for your child and your family. And then having, of course, bedtime routines and rituals that invite the child's rhythm, invite your rhythms, and co-regulating that, invites maintaining the quality of the connections and transitions. And so rituals will allow us. So for example, you might have a nighttime ritual around 7:30, the lights become dim, you start maybe running a bath, or you maybe light a candle, or you start playing some soft music. I didn't include in my foundations just yet because I'm still doing more and more research on this, and there's enough on there, and I will be revising and updating, but sound. How sound plays a role is wow. I mean, because it carries frequencies and it carries energy, and so sound can, I'm sure we all have experiences with sound, can alert us and alarm us and can really soothe and calm us. And so you're all familiar with the white noise machines and things like that from that standpoint. But I'm talking even about rhythms and sounds that come from music or from sources like water and different things. And so I'll be introducing that very soon. Okay, so solutions. I'm not going to spend too much time on each. These all correlate to the foundations. And my book, I have a book coming out, and my book will go deeper into all of these and give examples and things and ways you can work with. Solution, reprogramming expectations, attitudes, and beliefs. Considering sleep as a social and shared experience and not a solitary one. Whether you're sleeping in the same bed or not, you're in a shared environment. It's a social experience because you're in a family dynamic. Trusting that your baby knows how to sleep and wanting to sleep, allowing your baby to teach you to sleep, learning the sleepy cues and rhythms of your child. Healing trauma of all sorts, not just birth trauma like I gave an example of earlier, but also understanding the traumas of any kind. If your child experienced anything startling, you know, and every child's different. Some through an experience may have a traumatic experience and some may not. But understanding that that's a possibility and supporting your child or even yourself too, because you might have gone through a trauma that in your child's experience might be brought up for you, and learning to heal it and getting the support to heal it is important. And as a result, resourcing and applying techniques when triggers and stressors arise. So when you reach your limit of patience or intolerance, when you know you're in that place where you just can't take anymore, what resources and tools do you have? Because most of us are not being given those. We don't learn those in your average childbirth education class or in parenting school. It's like we're there, and it's like we fend for ourselves. And there are many tools out there that can allow us to work with situations when we're triggered or really, really stressed. And one of them is, again, the breathing, the taking a pause, really centering and grounding with yourself. And there's many others that I'm introducing in my book. Inviting and creating a support system is key. We're not meant to do this alone. Even 2 parents is still not enough. We're really meant to have a structure like a tribe, and having support systems is important. Strengthening connections to self and family, we play in eye-to-eye contact. You know, laughter, softening our energy, connecting deeper with our emotions and our heart. Huge, huge, huge. Playfulness, the play. There's a university out there on play and play research, and they're even saying how important it is to our human development, and how it absolutely can support us through challenges and you know, many things. Tracing and uncovering the root of behavior and crying. Being present to maintain connection and insight. And that's not always hard, especially when we're busy. When we have deadlines, when we have errands, when we have so much pressure, it is so hard to be present. And our children need us to be present. Whether you're a professional or a parent, presence is a present. It really, really is. And so giving ourselves that gift of understanding the power of presence. And it's a skill. I will tell you this because so many times we beat ourselves up. We beat ourselves up because we're not present, you know, we lose our patience. It's a skill, and guess what? It's a skill we're not taught in school. I want to start a school where my daughter and son are learning presence and building the skill of presence and building the skill of pausing. And there's alternative schools out there that are introducing meditations in schools and pausing, but you know, it's a skill. So it's important that we don't beat ourselves up for a skill that our culture has pretty much ignored and made alternative and not part of the norm, right? Being the change. It's easy to hear to be the change. I know. I get you. I know. It's hard to be the change. It's not easy to be the change, especially, again, when we live in a culture where, you know, we're always being fed the mind, and the idea of a change, but then living that change is not that easy. That's why putting ourselves in support systems and working with coaches and many others to support our lifestyle and changes we want to see is important. Allowing babies to be playful and be fully expressed, which means also allowing ourselves to be the same way. When's the last time you played? And when's the last time you allowed yourself to be fully expressed, right? And so, again, when we tune into ourselves, like that integrative you know, Wheel of Health, Integrative Medicine by Duke, it's like it comes together. It's like, oh yeah, I don't really play that much. I'm always serious. I'm always on the go. I'm stressed out. When we tune into that aspect of ourselves, then it's much easier to allow our children to do the same. Relaxation becomes part of our lifestyle. I'm not suggesting you go around and you're, you know, and you go around like silent and quiet all the time. And it's not in my personality. I'm always energetic. I'm always like on the upbeat. I'm like, you know, I have a, you know, really, really high energy. But what I've done to make relaxation part of my lifestyle is I've just brought in daily pauses. That's one thing I've done. Another thing I've done is I've taken my high energy and I've balanced it with my business sanctuary. I've created a sanctuary environment that balances and complements my energy so that when I walk into it, I'm embraced by that. So relaxation becoming your lifestyle can mean so many things. It could mean, you know, putting a screensaver on your desktop and computer that connects you with nature. It could mean a lot of things, right? So, and then taking the daily pauses, training your body to release during the day through short pauses of breathing meditation or guided meditation, or just simply being. If you're not into the breathing meditation or guided, you could simply just take a pause. Just be with yourself and pick a spot that you enjoy without distraction for a few minutes. Getting a full blood panel, checking for any imbalances, deficiencies, and food sensitivities, intolerances, allergies, huge. You know, eating a pro-sleep diet, understanding that there are anti-sleep foods out there and what those are. And yes, if you're breastfeeding, absolutely, that can affect your child. And if they're eating solids, you know, same thing. So hydration and the importance of hydration and how that plays a role for yourself as well, especially mamas that are breastfeeding. I already talked about exercise and movement. Ensuring the bedroom environment is green and creating a sanctuary, sunshine, transitioning from day to night, following the regular schedule, all these things I talked about. But again, they're solutions as well as foundations. And then keys, okay, keys. Because like I had mentioned, we can believe something and we can have an idea about something, but without setting ourselves up with these keys, we may still be limiting ourselves. Space. In order to invite any kind of change, whether you want to improve your child's sleep, your own sleep, you want to lose weight, you want to have less turmoil in your relationship, space is a key. Because space gives us the time. When I talk about space, the daily pauses can be considered a space. Anytime we take a moment to just pause, to not be always on the go, moving from one thing to the next. Space creates the ability to have insight, reflection, and to have control over instead of having a reaction, we have a response that comes from a place of wisdom and intelligence, and that has tuned in, because when we have space, we can pick up on a lot more than when we don't. When we have space, our intuition also can kick in and can be more developed and nurtured to understand, oh, what's really behind this challenge? Where is it coming from? So space. Relaxing into the space. We can have space, but if we're not relaxing, it's going to be hard to have that space. Curiosity. Oh my gosh, we're at an age where we're being told exactly what to believe and how to believe and what's right and what's wrong. And what I want to invite is a question mark. Let's bring the question mark in our lives on a more regular basis, but in a playful way. Let's be curious again. Let's be curious about everything. Okay, that book said this, and my sleep consultant told me that, and my mom told me that, and the person. But you know, okay, let's see if that applies here. But not in a way to retaliate or to prove anything, but it's just an open curiosity to see if that really is the case for your situation. Trusting. Trusting is huge, because trusting that there is a solution, trusting that we can work through this, trusting that we're meant to be supported, that life is not meant to be a struggle is key. Sometimes the work that I do with people is just trusting that they're meant to not suffer, because sometimes people have a belief about suffering that leads to all sorts of issues too. Flexibility, so I talked about, that means adaptability, being adaptable to your circumstances. Compassion. Compassion not just for your child, but like I said, for yourself. Being no matter what choices you've made, if you think let's say you've done extinction with your child and you realize later on they've had a trauma or whatever, let's just say you've done that. Rather than, saying, I've done something wrong, I'm an awful parent, having compassion for yourself and your child and trusting that that's part of the process of learning and growing and opening and evolving and becoming aware. I'll share it after, maybe I'll share it now. There's this really great quote that a friend of mine on Facebook who has this really great group called Marin Conscious Parents, she just recently put, I think she put it there or she put it on her page, and I just saw it and I absolutely really loved what it said here. It says, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, in order to avoid facing their own soul. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. So, these moments of struggle and challenge and where we're beating ourselves up for doing wrong and guilting ourselves and shaming, guess what? Those were portals to your consciousness. Those are portals to your awakening, to your evolving, that are also modeling the same for your children. So that's a much more empowering way to look at it, right? And then forgiveness and letting go. Once you realize, once you've awoken, that's why I call my book Awakening Through Sleep, because that's what it is. Once you've awoken and you've allowed the forgiveness and the letting go, then the challenges now become your opportunity. You now become part of the evolution. You now become part of the change, right? Which then opens us to unlimited possibilities, which then now connects us with love, which is our heart. And I don't mean that from a woo-woo standpoint. How many of you know that there's actually, I think it's called Heart Map, there's actually an entire research team, and there's many out there, I'm sure, but there's one that's called Heart Map that's dedicated to the actual science of the heart and how that correlates to, you know, the emotions and everything else. It's pretty phenomenal. So when I talk about love, it's that place of deep connection to ourselves, to our children, to the world, and that happens when all of these keys come in place. That ends my presentation. Thank you so much for your time. This is what I presented today is a small snippet of what I am going to expand upon in my book. And I will now take any questions or comments that people have, if there are any. And if, for those of you listening to the recording, if you have any follow-up questions or comments, or for those of you live, you may not have a question or comment, but later on you may have one, feel free. You can type it on the event page. On the event page, I will be having my assistant and myself also checking in to see any comments or questions that you are looking. So any comments or questions? You can either put the little raise your hand or type them in the chat box. Okay, and it's a lot of information to digest, lots of information to digest. And I know it's not, some of this information may be, you know, different from the context of what some of you might be used to. And so what I invite you to do is just sit with it, reflect on it, be curious about it, question it, right? That's all I'm here for. I just want to invite this way of perceiving things and, you know, how that unfolds for you on your path and the work that you do, whether you're working with your children or you're a professional working with families. You know, I trust that however that's meant to unfold for you is what's appropriate for you. And I just thank you today for taking the opportunity to, you know, give me your time and your presence and your openness and your curiosity. It means a lot to me, and it allows me to continue to do the work that I'm doing and give me a sense of purpose and drive. So I appreciate and I'm grateful for all of you. Rebecca, yes. Okay, good. We do have a couple of things. Yes, you will have access to the slides, and I will also be putting a link to the recording. So if some of you had to leave or you want to see it again as well, I am going to have a link so that you can have that. Rebecca, yes, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. Yes.
Okay, thanks. So to give you just a little bit of a background of kind of where I come from, I've been schooled in psychology. I've worked as a psychologist. A lot of kind of behavioral outlook from where I've come from. Now I'm working with families and sleep, and you know, with babies and children. And you know, something that's come up in my, just like you're saying, your curiosity and your thoughts about things. Something that's come up with me recently is actually something you started to touch on very early in the presentation. You know, we talked about how we now have generations of sleeper, you know, people that are not sleeping well, and that bad sleep, if you want to talk about it like that, is kind of increasing as opposed to decreasing, and why is that happening, and where's that all coming from? And I just wanted to kind of have a little dialogue about kind of, you know, whether it's fortunate or unfortunate, we are in a society now that does not necessarily let us adapt our behavior of sleep or our outlook of sleep. You know, as an example, two-parent working households where there has to be some kind of regimen, there has to be some kind of, we can't always honor the sleep from the theories that you're presenting here, which I like these theories, but as far as taking these theories and how we can use this information in conjunction with a society that we're forced to live in. We can't change our society. Exactly.
So I'm going to give you practicality, and my book's going to give you practice. I'm all about, one thing I know, Rebecca, you know, this is our first time connecting, but people who know me is I'm all about practicality and realistic application. So these are, for some of you, these are theories, but the practical application is actually very practical. Let's say you're working with two parents that are working, and they have, you know, they both have to work, they have to be away long hours with their child and so on. So it's really important to take a step back. When I work with people, I do a lot around beliefs, and there is a belief, and I want to just point that out, that because of our society, we have to kind of go with it, and we really don't have any control over it. So, there's really nothing much we can do about it. And I actually invite questioning that, because there are minor things you can do that start making the biggest of differences. And those minor things, like, for example, families that I work with, or parents, sometimes I work with one or both parents, just having that little moment of space, and I'm talking 5 minutes. If they have a lunch break, part of that 30-minute lunch break is taking 5 minutes to use the app that I gave them, that I suggested to them, or, just sit and reflect or journal, or just taking that space. And that starts all of a sudden creating a little shift. Like, imagine a line of ants, and one ant starts to veer from the line. All of a sudden, a new formation begins. So I'm not talking about following every single foundation that you just saw and every single thing. I'm talking about recognizing that all of these things influence sleep, and starting one shift already starts to turn the tide. If the only and then I'll give you another example. Let's say again, so that I gave you an example of that micro space that they could do in the day. So then let's just say they're gone all day, they're away from their child, they come home, they're stressed out, whatever. So then what I invite is, number one, an opportunity for, depending on if it's a single parent or both parent, we work with each situation, to take the energetic tempo of the household, and it's like a keto. For those of you that know a keto, what I love about keto so much, I'm not trained in it, by the way, I'm just going by the philosophy behind it, which is it teaches you to actually move with the energy and work with the energy, dance with the energy versus resist against it. So let's say you're coming home and you're stressed out, and it's going to affect your household and your child. Rather than resisting it, you actually honor it, you invite it, and then connection is huge. So what I might do in a, again, depending on a specific circumstance, is I might just have the family come together and pause together for a minute, no talking, just take a couple of minutes, just to hold hands or hold their baby, be with each other, no words of any kind, and that's it. And that takes 2 minutes. And that creates a certain shift and a certain energetic tempo. Food, so that's a huge one. So many people don't realize the tremendous amount of influence that their nutrition is having on their state, that their environment is having on their state. So depending, again, on where the imbalances are most and what kind of the root is, it might be a nutritional shift that we're making automatically. So there's many, many different ways of approaching it from a baby steps, and I'm big on that, because once you start inviting these shifts, you recognize that you actually have a lot more control in your response in how our society is. And guess what? What's happened as a result? These people then become pioneers. They become, how many people become, like, for example, now there's business coaches that are like, oh my God, I used to be a crazy, busy maniac, and it drove me to such an extent that, I had to find a solution and a way out, and now they're teaching the world how to do that. Or you have a parent in the same situation that, like, they started doing these little baby steps, and all of a sudden things started shifting. So again, just so that we're all on the same page, I'm not suggesting perfection. I'm not suggesting that your entire life overnight changes. What I'm suggesting is let's understand truly how the wheel of health works in conjunction with sleep. Let's understand the dynamics of what's happening internally and externally, and let's see where it benefits us, where we can practically make some minor shifts, and how those minor shifts can begin already shifting this other direction and inviting this way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It's an easier way to kind of look at it as far as giving input and feedback to families or to individuals, as opposed to trying to look at the overall huge picture, but trying to have them make small changes within, like, their daily routine and things like that.
Exactly. So today's webinar was an introduction of the method. I didn't present to you the consulting way of doing it, or even from how I work with parents, but it's all about meeting your clients where they're at, meeting your families where they're at, and working with them where they're at. So versus, instead of going, oh, okay, you're living like this, but no, you got to live like this, it's going, wait a minute, let's see where it makes absolute sense for you to make the shifts that actually are easiest to make, that support your process, because everyone has, as much as we limit ourselves, we've actually got strengths to work with. So part of where our support will come from is learning what those strengths are in the families we work with, and then using them to support the other parts that, you know, are facing the challenges.
Right.
That's a great question. I'm so glad you asked that, because today I only was able to introduce the method and not get into like the actual system of application, which maybe I should do a follow-up webinar about that. But my book will go into that, because application is everything. And, you know, I'm throwing ideas out there is great, but it's not until you practically apply them that's where the difference is made, right? That's where the juice is in the practical application. So, you know, and thank you, Rebecca, for the work that you do and for asking that really great question.
Thanks.
All right, now I have a question that came here in Spanish from, she said, and I'll translate it, she said, how do I change the form of thinking from people that think that sleeping, she said, hold on, that sleeping is secondary, that, you know, it's, and so on, and that she says she has a husband that he wakes up at 4. Hold on, let me just read a little bit more. Let me just, okay, so I got the gist of your question, and basically what it boils down to is how do we change the beliefs, right? So one thing I will say is that we can't control whether someone changes their belief or not. Okay, that's off the bat, we cannot control that. The only thing we have control over is ourselves. How we respond, how we react, you know, just like in that wheel of health from the, you know, from Duke, how we respond, that's the only control we have, right? When it comes to other people, the only thing that we can do is, number one, asking questions, powerful questions, questioning things. So if your husband has a belief like, oh, you know, I can't sleep past 4 a.m. Is that true? What I'd love to introduce you to, there's the work of Byron Katie. She has, if you go to her website, I think it's called thework.com. She has some fabulous, fabulous worksheets on the kinds of questions you can ask about certain beliefs we have about certain things. So there's questioning, and in your questioning your husband or whoever you're working with, you also need to detach yourself from the outcome. So sometimes we fall into the notion that like, oh, I'm going to question something, and in order for our agenda for them to change. If I ask them this question, they're going to change, right? But we actually have to let go of that. We need to let go of that kind of outcome, because it's their path. When that belief changes, if it needs to change, is their path. It's not our responsibility to control them. So questioning, and then also providing, you know, information, articles, things. Oh, did you know? And if they're not ready to change, if they're stuck on that belief, because in order for someone to change their belief, they first have to be open to wanting to change it. And they also need to have a curiosity and you know, are they willing to be curious and to experiment and explore and be open? So changes of belief come with that setup as well. And again, we can't always force that. Sometimes it'll work and sometimes it won't, but it's really up to that person's path. All we can do is ask the powerful questions that can then provide more insight or provide education that can do that. But again, the other person has to be open to it. Did that help? Okay, great. Any other questions or comments? All right, thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate, like I said, your time. It's been an honor for me. I look forward to sharing my book with all of you. I will be doing videos and sharing more excerpts because my book's going into editing in a couple of months, and then, you know, that process is going to take a little bit, but I will be sharing a lot more. I'll possibly do a follow-up webinar on a practical application because I think that's really important. And should you have any questions, insights, or anything you'd like to follow up with me on, again, please post it on the event page. I'll be having my assistant and myself checking it regularly, and I look forward to staying in touch. Thanks again, and take care. Bye-bye.